Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Secret Resume podcast, hosted by me, Melody Moore. In this podcast, we explore the people, places, and experiences that have shaped my guests, those which have influenced who they are as people and where they are in their work life today. You can listen in as we have a rich exploration of often unexamined and undiscussed, but very important aspects of their lives, or as I like to call it, their secret resume. So my guest today is Paul Holbrook. Welcome, Paul. Really excited to have you here today on this very beautiful sunny November day. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm what I would call a leadership rebel. I'm somebody that spent 20 years in the financial services industry. I originally started off as a developer, as a coder. My degree was in mathematics, so I was a bit of a geek, but a kind of a sociable geek, I would have said. But I realized after about 2 or 3 years of coding in banks that I was more interested in how people worked than I was in how computers worked. And that naturally then took me up the people management pathway over the next, 20 years, I suppose. The height of my what I call first career was running division of 350 people in change within an investment bank in the City of London. And then not just then, it was kind of always through. I had this kind of slight discomfort around managers and how managers, especially in expert industries like technology, never seem to quite get management right. Almost like they did it on the side, and it really frustrated me. So about 7 years ago, my wife, Emma, turned around to me and said, look, you're miserable doing what you do. Why don't you go and create a business, try and change the world? And so that's what I did. I left to disrupt the existing story of toxic management, taking us from a place where managers rule through fear to a place where they lead with love. That's essentially me, and I call myself a leadership rebel.
Perfect. And the name of your company is?
The name of the company is Diary Detox Limited, but there are kind of two different focus for the company. One is around Diary Detox, which is a leadership tool that is there to help people create time for themselves and to lead others. But my real passion, the thing that will disrupt the existing story of management, is a side of the business called Time to Lead, which is, I suppose you would call it, a leadership development pathway for taking people from being an aspiring manager up to a competent and loving leader.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's actually have a question before we even go back to which made me think when you were just speaking. You said you were a geek. Are you still a geek?
Yeah, I suppose kind of, but in a slightly different way. I really wasn't a maths geek. I mean, we'll get around to this conversation in looking at what we're going to be talking about today. But I suppose I liked computers. I was a fairly logical individual. I am a fairly logical individual. I think we a lot of the time, I think we overcomplicate things, probably through the fear of what it will mean to uncomplicate things. But my kind of guiding mantra, my strategy, my technique for dealing with people who don't want to change things over my 20-year career in the city was, but imagine if it were really that simple and we didn't even consider it. And so I would usually use the phrase, just humor me. Let's just try it this once. And if it isn't that simple, we'll find out really quickly. And, 90% of the time, some of the problems we had really were that simple. So I suppose you'd call me a little bit of a geek around that. I like to simplify things. On the technology side, I'm much less of a geek now. My son has taken over that mantle. If there's anything to be done, anything to be fixed, I will just get my wife to call him. He's at university in Lancaster, studying computer science, so he is definitely a geek. But I'm kind of a geek in other ways. I fly a plane, I play the piano, and yeah, I like like making things really simple. I like helping people make things really simple and helping managers get the best out of their people. So if that's geeky, yes, I am. If it isn't, I'm probably not.
My nephew actually studied that exact same course at Lancaster.
I really.
Yeah.
It's a very popular one.
He's working in a hotel now.
Probably nothing to do with technology either.
No. Anyway, let's go back in time to your first. What you've picked, which is really interesting, is you've picked people. So all of your the things that we're going to talk about are specifically around people, and the people that have influenced you to be who you are and what you're doing today. So let's go back to your first one, which is Anne Cohen.
Cohen, and she'll probably never listen to that. I just got goosebumps. I got a bit emotional. And she, I really hope that someday she hears this, and I might even try and get it in front of her. The fact that we're going to talk about Anne. So, yeah. So, I mean, I had quite an unorthodox education. Not crazily, but I came from a very working class background. My dad was a milkman. My mum was a factory worker, and for us, well, for me, school was just somewhere I went to be with my friends. It wasn't something we did for academics, and both myself and my sister Patsy, we both kind of flourished later in life, I suppose you could say. So I left school at 16 with very mediocre grades. I had four C's? I think it was one B, 3 C's, 2 D's, an E, and a fail. The fail was in art, hence I'm not an artist. And I left school not really knowing what to do, and I kind of chilled over the summer, and then it was like 2 days before my friends were about to go back to college, and I kind of went, oh, what am I going to do? And I basically applied for the first course I could find, which was one in computing, interestingly, and I dropped out of it. And then I did another course in electrical engineering, and I dropped out of that. I did a couple of jobs and was made redundant, and I just had no idea really what I wanted to do. And about 2 years later, I was helping my girl. I was 18, my girlfriend was 16. And I was helping my girlfriend with her maths homework at the kitchen table in Offenham, near Evesham in Worcestershire. And my girlfriend's mom, Anne Cohen, just happened to be doing some stuff in the kitchen as I was helping her daughter out, Jo. And she turned around to me and she said, "You remember a heck of a lot of your maths. Have you ever considered doing an A-level in maths?" And I kind of went, no. And I was at a crossroads where I'd just been made redundant again. And I thought, what am I going to do? And so it just so happened it coincided with the start of a new school term. And so I applied to Worcester Sixth Form College to do an A-level in maths and an A-level in computer science. And they accepted me. They wouldn't let me do any more than that because I'd taken 2 years out of school, and doing 3 was seen as not a good thing. And I really enjoyed it. I had an amazing teacher called Simon Tinley, brilliant maths teacher. And I really kind of found myself. I still skived college a little bit, but I could probably get away with it because I was doing things I really was quite good at and I quite enjoyed. And then from there, all the people, all my contemporaries there were started applying to universities. And I thought, well, maybe I should apply to a university. And I did. I applied to the London universities, mostly, Imperial College, King's, UCL, Royal Holloway, and so on.
Why London?
I don't know, really. I think I saw them as more prestigious, I suppose. There was never any chance of me ever going to Oxford and Cambridge with my background. Although nowadays, I think you probably do need a little bit of diversity of thought in those areas, if I'm really honest. But yeah, I just saw that. And also my best friend was going to one as well. He was going to UCL. And I interviewed at most of them, got a place at UCL, and I accepted it. And I've just got to say this because I think it's really interesting. I actually got a call from Royal Holloway, and they basically said, "Why haven't you accepted our offer?" And I said, "Because I haven't got an offer." Said, "Oh, well, we thought we sent one. Have you never been to see us?" I said, "No." He said, "Would you like to come?" And I thought, hey, it's a day off college. Why not? So I went to Egham on the train on my own from Evesham, changed at Reading, and went to Royal Holloway and walked onto the campus and just went, oh my goodness, this is beautiful.
Mm.
And that day I rang up UCL and asked them to release me from my offer. And they said, well, we can't make you come somewhere you don't want to come. So of course we'll release you. And I ended up going to Royal Holloway. And yeah, that my life has been filled with, I would call them happy coincidences.
Mm.
But that chain of events took me on a journey to finding out what it was I really wanted to do, I suppose. And it all started from those fateful words from Anne Cohen saying, you really remember a lot of your maths. You know, she saw something in me that I absolutely did not see in myself ever. And years later, I actually, in my job in the City of London, many years later, I met Anne Cohen's son-in-law, who is married to Jo, the girl that I was dating at that point. We actually met, we had a meeting and in London, and we both kind of were from the Evesham area. So it was really unusual. And I found out who he was, and I said, you must tell Anne that I would not be here right now if it wasn't for her. So yeah, I'm getting a bit emotional again now. But yeah, Anne Cohen is definitely one of those people. Of course, we're excluding my mum and dad and my sister.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask about your mum and dad because, you know, they presumably had not been to university. You know, you didn't have that, maybe that expectation that you would.
No, not at all. It was, I mean, I'll be honest. I had friends who were at school with me, and I went to a school originally, Evesham High School in Evesham, and some of them were going to go on and do A levels, and for me, I saw them as the posh kids. You know, A levels were what the posh kids did,
right?
And so no, there was absolutely no pressure on me, and it was no suggestion whatsoever. My parents didn't care about me; they loved me deeply, and I think that's the biggest thing they gave me was that love. It was unconditional, and I felt loved wholeheartedly, and I still do. But no, there was no pressure on me, and I was the first person in our family to go to university. But I found my own way, and I know that if I had been pushed, I probably would have made a bit of a hash of it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So no, they gave me. I would honestly say they gave me the people skills that I needed through life, and I say this to my son right now. Yes, okay, go and do your degree, go and do all these things. And my son's called William. William, the one thing that will carry you through your life with success is your ability to deal with people. You can learn any skill from a book.
Yeah.
It's really hard to learn people. If you've got a natural talent for it, which he has, and my stepdaughter Lucy has as well, if you've got a natural talent with people, it's going to take you miles. Yeah.
And how did your parents feel about you going to do A levels, going to university? Were they excited? What was their reaction?
So my mum was like, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, great, you know. And I mean, crikey, she supported me through it all. I mean, she paid for me through university. I didn't have to get a job. I could literally, I mean, I am a bit of a mummy's boy, so you know, she would support me no matter what. My dad, he was definitely supportive, but you remember, I'd gone from school to a college, had dropped out, gone to another college, had dropped out, had done 2 jobs and been made redundant. And for him, it was just another, and he was like, oh my goodness, not another thing, you know. And I totally get it, right? I probably would have thought exactly the same thing. I think he didn't really mind. He just wanted me to stick at something. And I did. And even though when I went to the college, I wasn't always the best at attendance. He did get a few calls from my tutor saying, Paul's not turning up, what's going on? When I finished it, and I got my grades, I was predicted an A in computing and a C in maths. And I actually got an A in maths and a C in computing, which was really bizarre. But when I rang him up, he got incredibly emotional, and you could just tell he was so proud. But yeah, they would support us in whatever we did. They just wanted us to take it seriously and make the most of it, I think.
It's interesting what you say about it was someone outside of the family, and I think that's really interesting, isn't it, that who we mix with and associate with, if they're brought up with perhaps different expectations or aspirations to us, it gives us a sense of what's possible, whereas if we're perhaps in our own world and that's not the norm, that kind of difference or diversity of friends and acquaintances just gives you a glimpse into another world.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember who it was, but I saw some. Maybe it was it. I think it maybe had been a Daniel Priestley podcast, I think, and he was talking about. I think it was him, and I'm really sorry if it was somebody else, and I've misquoted him, but was talking about how the environment that you put yourself in, is so influential in the opportunities that arise, in the things that you realize, and if you generally they would say if you surround your people with naysayers, chances are you're not going to accept a lot. But if you surround yourself with optimistic people, chances are some of that's going to rub off on you, and I honestly do believe it did with me.
Lovely, thank you. So shall we move to your next person who was your first manager in your first job in the city?
Yeah, Jerry Shule. So yeah, I mean, when I left university, I mean, I went from doing a maths degree to doing a master's in IT at UCL. So I did get to UCL in the end.
Eventually.
And I really wasn't sure what I was going to do next in terms of job. And I just happened to be reading a magazine there were two computer magazines back then. There was Computer Weekly and there was Computing. And I was reading Computing on the way into my final exam, and I saw this one-page advert. Crikey, if I'd have thought about it, I'd have got it out, because I think I actually have it here with me now. I actually had an advert that was called, I can't find it, that was for technical associates. It was basically graduate programmers for a bank called Credit Suisse First Boston. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, that looks interesting. And I saw the salary. And back then, this was like 1999, I think it was. And the average graduate salary back then was about 14,000, 16,000 pounds maybe. This was 25,000 pounds starting salary. Wow. I went, oh, wow. And I thought, I'm going to apply for that. It's the only job I applied for, and I got it. Alongside, I think it was about 15 to 25 other graduates. And so I was a graduate programmer. We went through a series of training, because university can't prepare you for absolutely everything. And then having completed that training, I was put into what they call global operations systems development. And I was
sounds fancy.
It does, doesn't it? And it always does. I've got a friend who never went to the city, and he's always very impressed by it. It's like, it's no different. It's probably worse than everywhere else. But I was working for a guy called Jerry Shule. It's quite zen, actually, Jerry. He was quite chilled, very calm, took everything in his stride, obviously very capable, very experienced. But Jerry gave me a piece of work that if I'd been him, I would never have given me. But I suppose he saw something in me that I was capable of doing this thing. It was quite a well, I saw it as quite a critical thing. It was basically it was writing the code that would process messages that get sent from Credit Suisse to the Deutsche Börse exchange. So for me, for first job, I'm going, whoa. And so, yeah, that was one of my first things I did. And he never micromanaged. He always empowered me. I don't know. He just, looking back on it, he was the most, and I use that word zen because that is the absolute overriding thing I remember about him, is that nothing ever really seemed to faze him, even though it was that kind of, when all around you are going crazy, stay calm. And that was Jerry to a T. And he was just a lovely guy, he would do his best for you. He would look after you, check in with you. Not too much. I always call it the Goldilocks zone. Never too much, never too little, just right. And I think you can start to learn your management craft in two different ways. You can either learn it the bad way, which is see the managers who you worked for who are horrible and think, I will never do that. And I've had some of those. Or you can do it the other way, which is see the ones that are great and go, wow, that is just, you're a swan. You're just floating around and things are happening around you. And it was that empowerment and support. And he does know this because somebody actually put a post on LinkedIn years ago, who is the best manager you ever had? And I did say it was Jerry Shaw, and I at Jerry Shaw'd him, and he came back. He said, "That's really, really kind. Thank you very much." And it was like, no, it's totally deserved. And this was when I kind of gone through my first time journey of going as managing director. So that probably meant quite a lot. But having gone through my whole career up to that level, he's the one I singled out, and he was right at the beginning of the journey. So yeah, that was Jerry.
It sounds like he was both an inspiration to you in terms of style of management, but also that he took a chance on you. Oh, and yeah. I'm curious what you think he saw in you.
No idea. He may not have seen anything in me. It may have just been that it was his style. You know, I hope he saw in me that I really enjoyed what I did. I hope he saw that I was a very capable programmer. I don't really think the people skills came into it much. You know, I have had moments since when, you know, at odd moments during your career, you'll get headhunted and the recruitment person wants to meet you for a coffee, like a clandestine coffee in a coffee shop in the middle of the city, and nobody can see you. And I remember turning up to one of those in particular, and it was two people from the same company, same kind of headhunting company, were meeting me to interview me. And they kind of looked at me as I sat down, and they kind of looked at the CV, and then looked at me, and then looked at the CV, and then went, yeah, something doesn't make sense here. And I went, what do you mean? And they said, well, maths degree, IT, lifetime in computing, and yet and what they were really saying is, because I turned up, lovely smile, nice handshake. Hi guys, how are you? How are things? They're very personable.
He looked them in the eye.
Yeah, right. And they said it just doesn't make sense. And I went,
right.
And all I could say was, I don't know how to respond to that. Which is unusual for me because I usually have to respond to pretty much everything. And I hope he would have seen in me that whilst I was very technically capable, I was also very personally capable as well. And like I said, that's the bit that my mum and dad gave to me. And then university and college gave me the kind of techie side of it and whatever natural given talents I had. So yeah, I really don't know what he saw in me. I'd hope it would be two of those things, but knowing Jerry, I think he was just bloody good at being a manager. You know, he gave people a chance. Anybody, I'll give you a chance, and I'll, you know, and this is 100% within my ethos and how I now teach management, is that, you know, micromanagement isn't something you do, it's something someone else feels. And as a manager, you have the ability to make anybody feel micromanaged. And it's usually by just checking in as much as you need to be comfortable, but no more than you need. And I think then he would have seen, okay, he's making progress. And then he'd have stepped back a little bit and then come back in again and step back. So I think it's more that. I would love to think it's something he specifically saw in me, but I'm not sure it is. I think that's probably why I've pointed him out as one of the people that were a standout person in my career, I suppose.
So he took a risk on people.
Yeah. And I think you do have to take a risk, but I don't think you have to take that big a risk. Yeah. We hear today, I mean, we've heard it for years, and it really grates with me, is that when you hear commentary around good management, or even good leadership, people will say a key to a good manager is someone who trusts their people. And I got to say, I couldn't disagree more. You're not there to trust your people, you're there to manage them. And trust is a very different thing, right? And here's the example I always use. I always say to people, you're in a stable relationship. Yes? And they'll go, yes. And I go, okay. So do you think that and I'm assuming that you don't believe that your partner will cheat on you? And they'll go, yes, of course. And I'll say, do you feel the need to go and I said, why is that? And they said, because I trust them. I said, okay, I get that, right. Do you feel the need to go and check on their phone to make sure they're not? And they'll go, no, of course not. Why? Because I trust them. And that's the difference, right? When you talk about trust is almost a blind faith. Trust is I know it's not going to happen because I trust you. That's the whole point. And when you say to managers, you need to trust your people, we're using that version of trust so you can basically just walk away and know that it's all going to happen magically. It's like, no, because that isn't reality. You do have to check up on your people. You just don't have to check up on them more than you need to, or more than they think you need to. And that amount is something that you should agree between you. It's an expectation that you should create. And that's always my thing around trust, is that the reason most managers are really scared off by that phrase is because they know what trust is. And if you were to take it to its natural conclusion, that means you just have to give somebody a task, walk off, and then just assume it'll get done. That's abdicating responsibility, not delegating. And so, yes, every manager has to take some element of risk, but the amount of risk you need to take is decided between you and the person who you are managing. And it should be a conversation between the two. So, yeah, lots of managers don't do that. They just basically, they'll give you a task, then come and check in every 5 seconds. Right, you're doing it, you're doing it, you're doing it, you're doing it. And some people love that. I would have personally hate that. I would have seen that as micromanagement. But he just knew how far back to stand and then to come back in at the right moment. And I have a technique that I use that helps people decide on what that time frame should be. But yeah, definitely he did take a risk, just not an uncalculated risk, I believe.
And I think I actually think a lot of leadership is around risk or perception of risk. And the reason that we don't do things often is because it feels personally risky to us.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in the second kind of program that we run called Time to Manage, it's about equipping managers with all the skills they need to become a manager. There's one that I never ever see in other management courses, that it is, and the way we do it is we do it so that they're done at specific times. You do them in the right order at specific times. And one of them is really early on, and it's called Understanding and Dealing with Risk. Yeah, and it's one of the most, other than setting targets, understanding and dealing with risk is one of the most important skills that any new manager has to have, because many new managers don't know some of the risks that are existing within their worlds. And one of the reasons they don't know those risks is because they're not talking to their people, because their people know their risks. They are living it every day. They see it every day. And so whilst you see other management courses that have these modules called having great one-to-ones, yeah, I mean, having great one-to-ones in itself is not an end in itself. It's part of a bigger thing. And so for me, learning to have good one-to-ones is part of a module called Understanding and Dealing with Risk, because I want managers to realize that having a one-to-one with your people, making time to talk to your people, is a fundamental part of understanding the risk layout of your world. And once you know that risk's there, you can ignore it, or you can choose to do something about it. And that is a key thing. And yeah, we're scared of taking risk, but risk it's a fundamental part. And anybody that doesn't like taking risk probably has no place in the role of manager, because it's just a core part of it.
Well, I think there's something really important about understanding your own attitude, whatever the word is, towards risk, isn't there? And some people will find some things risky and other things not. But I'm not sure people necessarily understand how much their risk appetite is driving their behaviors.
Absolutely.
Because we think we're more rational than we actually are. That's basically my fundamental line for life, is we're not as rational as we think we are. Right, let's move on to your next person. So they were very different to Jerry, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the next person, and I don't think it's because of who they were or what they did, but I think it's because of what they saw in me. And that was really massively important. So next person is a guy called Adam Wheelwright. And Adam was a Northern Cambridge graduate. And he loved the facts. He said what he likes, and he likes what he bloody well says. Rugby league, Cambridge Blue. Lovely guy, really, really good fun to work for. Not my personal style of manager. I think I probably wouldn't 100% agree with every approach that he took, but he definitely gave people a chance, and he could definitely see things in people. And I worked in Adam's shadow for quite a few years in 1, 2, 3 different companies, actually. So you could argue I did follow him around, actually, I suppose. Because there were certain aspects of his approach that I really, really liked, but I kind of grew into my own skin and thought, oh, I think I'd do that probably a little bit differently in future. But what was really lovely was that in the last company that we worked for, which was a company called Commerzbank. Commerzbank is a German bank. The bank was actually, it took over the bank we originally worked for, which was called Dresdner Kleinwort. And as a result of that takeover, there was a slight change. Well, no, actually, it was quite a significant change as to how the bank wanted to manage people, how they wanted to structure the development world. Coders, change, call it. And there was a guy who did the closest thing to the job that I ended up doing beforehand. And he was proper techie. I mean, I would have called him an accidental manager. 100, not Adam, this other guy. And what was really fascinating is that he was somebody that would walk in the morning, had his earbuds in, he would walk to the lift, stand in the lift, not talk to anybody, walk into his office, shut the door, and then other than a stream of people walking in and out of his office all day, would not speak to anybody about anything. He was a complete and utter geek, right? Proper, not a people person. And then when this change happened, the closest role to his role became available. Now, we've got to understand the context here. So I was a VP. Now, a VP in American companies is very senior, yeah? In banking world, VP is actually quite junior manager. So you've got an associate, like an AVP, a VP, a director, an executive director, managing director, yeah? So there's quite a few steps between them. And this new role came up, and they approached every director / executive director level person in the company. I came to realize later, they approached every person like that in the company who was relative to that world and asked them if they wanted to apply for that job. And because of the way the job was structured, it was much more of a people role. It was all about developing pools of people that could do things, investing in people. And the kind of stock phrase for most people who were approached with that role and turned it down, am I allowed to swear on the podcast? It's not a really bad. Okay. Is they would say, I don't want that because that sounds like HR bullshit. That's what they basically would say about the role. And it's because the role was about people. It was about, like I said, creating pools of people with the right skills, looked after, that were nurtured, etc. And they couldn't find anybody to take the role at that ED level. So they came down to the director level. Now, remember, I'm a VP. And so they did. They came down to the director level and they asked people who wanted to apply, and they pretty much got that stock phrase, that sounds like HR bullshit to us. We don't want to do that. And then Adam was an MD. Okay, so he was right at the top of the tree, but in a different world. He was in operations in the business and I was in technology. And he turned around to the incoming CIO, Chief IT Officer, and said, you should have a look at Paul Holbrook. You should have a chat with him. I think he could be a really interesting choice. And so they did. They approached me and they said, would you be interested in this role? It was so funny. I remember when the existing CIO, I was in Frankfurt at the time, and he rang me, he said, are you in Frankfurt? I said, yes, meet me for a coffee. So we had this coffee. I remember I was a VP, D, MD, ED, MD, loads of levels. And he said, so head of development in London. And I said, right, and what would I be doing for him? And he went, no, we want you to apply for the head of development in London. And I went, oh my goodness. Now, imposter syndrome was, all my alarms were going, right?
What was the imposter syndrome saying?
How the hell am I going to do that? How the hell am I going to do that? I'm a VP. Now, the interesting thing is, I thought the role was a director level role, okay, which is one up from a VP. And I was still thinking to myself, oh, I can't do that. But then when they said it was for all of the developers in London, which was 350 people, I kind of went, oh my goodness, how on earth? I mean, why me? Because there were so many other people there, right? And you've got to also understand is that all the people that I currently worked for would end up working for me. And the people that work for them would end up working. But it was like, no, they're not going to take me seriously, right? And so I chatted to my, at the time, wife. We are since divorced. And she said to me, she said, so who will take the role if you don't take it? And you know what? It was a genius stroke.
That's a great question.
because maybe I should put my ex-wife down here as one of the people. She certainly gave me my son, which I cannot have any problem with.
No.
But she said, who would take the role if you didn't? And it was that question. And it was that previous person who held that role. And I remember watching that person walk around and not do the things I thought, and thought, do you know what? If I ever got to that level, I would never do it that way. That was the example of learning it the negative way. And when she asked me that, I just thought, do you know what? I'm going to apply for it. You know, it's on them. If I'm not good enough for this role, then it's up to them to tell me I'm not good enough for this role. It's not up to me to tell me I'm not good enough for this role. So that's how I kind of overcame the imposter syndrome bit. So I had to go through tests. I had to go through an assessment center that was normally 10 people. They ran it for one person, just me, in Frankfurt, in one day. It was normally over 3 days. And I did that, and I got the job. And I went from running a team of 15 to a division of 350 overnight. And I did it one step at a time. But if Adam hadn't seen that what they were looking for was a people person, they wanted somebody who liked the HR bullshit. And it wasn't HR bullshit, right? You get nothing done in a company without people. So if you're not focusing on creating people who feel loved, people who feel valued, etc., then you're going to get nothing done, right? And I'd seen so many techies get promoted at that level. That previous guy, he was a techie, classic. He was a thought leader, absolutely, but he wasn't a people leader. And yeah, that's kind of that's how that story played out. And so I wouldn't have got that. I wouldn't have even been offered that role, and goodness knows where I'd be now if Adam hadn't seen that in me and hadn't, quite frankly, had the balls to turn around to the very senior people and say, have a look at this guy. I know he's a VP, but give him a chance. The interesting thing was, there were two other interesting points of that, is that my boss at the time, I told him that I'd been approached to do this role. And he looked at me and he went, but you realize that you'll be responsible for the pay and rations for everybody in London in IT, right? And I went, yeah, and? Which is interesting, because it's almost like he was trying to imposter. Well, he wasn't trying to, but his kind of imposter was, but you? I was going, yeah, I know, it's kind of great, right? So there was that. The other thing that I really love about this is that when I then had the position confirmed, I didn't realize that it was an MD position. So I went from VP to MD right at the top of the tree in one jump. And what was really interesting is, as soon as it became clear that the role was an MD role, the number of people who had previously said, I don't want that because it sounds like HR bullshit. It's amazing how many people came out of the woodwork and said, actually, maybe I'll apply for it. And it was like, too late. Too late.
You said that word, too late now.
You said it. So yeah, it was, and for the 4 years I did it, it was the job I was born to do. I absolutely loved it.
How did you deal with that imposter syndrome? Did it continue into you doing the role? You know, obviously it kind of reared its head when you were talking about it, but did it continue?
Yeah, for a short period afterwards. I mean, to tell you the truth, the biggest, do you know what? The biggest problem that I had was that I didn't know how I was going to structure the organization underneath me. And what I mean by that is just the first level of what would be executive directors underneath me. I had no idea what that should look like. And that was quite overwhelming because you're kind of going, okay, this is mine now. How am I going to do that? What does it need to look like? What's the right answer? And, often you'll see those posts saying that, you've got that journey, but every journey starts with one step. And the way I dealt with it is probably, it is. It's absolutely a case study in that, which is I just thought, I'm just going to have to try something. I just have to go with something. And so I did. I basically said, okay, well, I think if we do it this way, this way, this way, and this way, we put those in there. And I brought in people who were going to work for me, who were originally I'd worked for. So, the guy that actually interviewed me and hired me ended up being one of my direct reports, a guy called Paul Ward. He was my head of project management. And I ran it past him and I just said, what do you reckon? And he went, that could work, and I think he saw that I was just, he wasn't precious about anything. He just saw that I was there to help him, which I think is the big thing. Anybody that goes into that position where they are basically managing people that they once worked for, all you have to do is show them that you are totally invested in them. And that goes away really quickly, because that's all we want from managers. We just want somebody who cares about us and is going to help us thrive. And that was my core, right? That was actually absolutely at my core. So I realized that there is no right answer to that structure. There is no book that tells you that. You just have to try something. And so I said, well, let's try this. And it just happened to work. And if it hadn't, I'd have tweaked it. And, I'd looked at so many very senior managers make howling mistakes in the past. And I think I kind of put my money where my mouth is, because rather than say, well, I'm going to do this, I basically went to the people who I appointed and said, I'm thinking about this. What do you reckon? In some cases, I would go, I don't know what on earth we're going to do. Anybody got any ideas? And people love to be empowered. They love to be asked, because they often have better ideas. They're closer to the coalface than you are. So why wouldn't they have a better idea? So I just kind of, in computing parlance, I ate my own dog food. I basically treated people the way I wanted to be treated.
I heard that phrase before.
It's a very common thing in agile development. They say we eat our own dog food. So we do what we say we should do, right? And that's what I did. And when you empower people, when you ask people to step up, it's amazing how much they will.
That makes me think of, there was one of these fresh dog food companies on Dragon's Den, and they ate their own dog food.
I love that. I love that.
It just makes me feel sick. But
there was one other benefit to that jump as well. There was a guy who didn't work for me, but worked for a kind of a parallel, we'll call it a silo. And he was somebody that was very, very like me, very good people, very techie, had gone up each rung of the ladder. And what was interesting is that he got to a certain point, and then he found it really hard to let go. He was somebody that you wouldn't call it micromanager. He was almost getting stuck in the weeds. He was like spending hours in spreadsheets doing things. And I remember him coming into my office one day, and I was now an MD and he was a director. And I was just saying, I won't say his name, but I said, why are you doing that? He said, because I have to do that. I went, you really don't. Why are you doing that? That's something that somebody else should be doing for you. But the thing is that there was a slight nervousness in my laughter when I saw what he was doing, because I know that if I'd gone at that hierarchy the way he had, one step at a time, I probably would have been inclined to get into the same position, because letting go, I was a natural doer. I like doing things. I was a problem fixer, and it's so easy to get stuck into that. Oh, I'll do it quicker. By getting that massive leap from VP to MD, I had no choice. I couldn't. I just had to say, right, I'm going to create 5 divisions. These are the people that are going to run them. Guys, this is my vision. This is what I value. I'm here for you to help these things. These are the things I want to steer clear of. Do it. And I couldn't have done it any other way. I literally didn't have the time to start getting stuck in the weeds, because I just, so I actually think that jump really did me a favor. Because I think I'd have really struggled to step away from the detail.
What do you think were the main, I mean, it's an unusual situation to jump so many levels. I've met a few people that have done that, but it's especially leaping over people who used to manage you. That's kind of an interesting challenge.
And people who manage them.
Yes, yeah, exactly. What would you say with the main, what did you learn from making the transition from, VP to MD? What did you learn about yourself?
I don't know what I learned about myself. I mean, I actually don't know what I learned about myself. Maybe that will come to me. I think what I learned was my instincts around people when I was a junior manager. What I learned was that my instincts were spot on. Because when I became a manager for the first time, unlike a lot of, I wasn't unique, but I think I was quite rare. When I became a manager for the first time in technology, I no longer saw my job as writing code or developing systems. I saw my job as making it as simple as possible for my people to do theirs. That was it. That is how I saw it. And I always described myself as being institutionally lazy. And what I meant by that was I had no interest in doing somebody else's job for them. Yeah, I wanted to get away from that stuff so they can do it, because at some point, you never know when the next thing around the corner comes, either a new job or a promotion or whatever. And if you've built such a dependency on you, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. And so many managers hold on to detail for fear of being made redundant or fear of being let go. Whereas actually it's the one thing that will probably earmark you for being let go, because you're not developing people. And a classic one. So that guy I said, who was the guy who didn't want to be a manager, and I said, I think you'd be great. He was the guy that I was succession planning immediately prior to getting offered this job. And I remember when I passed the assessment center, and my boss, a guy called Gert Gouverneur in Germany. Gouverneur, what a name, mate. Governor. Perfect name for a high-level manager.
That's nominative determinism.
So he basically said, okay, I'd like you to take up the role. I'd like to do the job. When can you be free? When can you start? And I said, tomorrow. And I remember him going, what do you mean tomorrow? You got hand stuff over? I said, that was handed over weeks ago, And it was because I'd already been succession planning this guy, a guy called Jonathan Ungemuth. I've been succession planning him for months. Yeah. And I remember turning around to him and saying, Jonathan, I've just got a new job. I'm now going to be doing this. And his phrase was, F word me, Paul. How the hell did you manage that? But he said, how am I supposed to do this? I said, John, you're already doing it. You've been doing it for months. I've just been taking you on it really slowly, to the point where you don't even it's that like boiling a frog really slowly.
Yes. Yeah.
That was his succession planning route. I basically started to boil him really slowly. And before he got there, he didn't realize he was doing it. So I think it taught me that approach to management worked, because it worked. It allowed me to step up. I think what it also taught me, the reason I also know it works is because works, that guy who I said I'd never do it his way, the guy that walked into the lift, earphones on, blah, blah, blah. I basically ate my own dog food again on that. You know, I would come into the office in the morning. I was a bit of a superstar. Well, no, not a superstar. I was a bit of a rock star at that point. People go, it's that guy that got promoted up to MD. And I remember coming into the lift in the mornings and just saying, morning, everyone. And it's like everybody went, he's talking to us. Why is he talking to us? And I would just talk to people and I would walk the floor and I wouldn't sit in my office all day. And I remember, you know, there were two things that I think made me stand out as well at that point. But I was just living what I honestly believe managers were there to do. And notice I haven't used the word leader here, right? Because I think other people decide you're a leader. You don't get to decide that yourself. One of them was when people got promoted. No, let's do it the other way around. When I took over that role, there were some people that would get retention bonuses because the organization was getting merged together and you had to secure certain people in critical roles. And some people got what they call retention bonuses and some people didn't. And everybody expects they're going to get one, but not everybody does. So the first thing I had to do was to decide with people who was going to get the retention bonuses. And then the second thing is we had to tell everybody who was and who wasn't going to get it. And I remember thinking to myself, I've got to make a mark here, not just for everybody else, but for my management team, for the people who are working for me. And so I said to them, because I could see the fear in their eyes, they were going to have to go and tell people they weren't going to get a retention bonus around a lot of uncertainty when an organization is being merged. And I said, I tell you what, everybody that gets a retention bonus, you can tell them who got it. Everybody that isn't going to get one, I'll meet with them personally and I'll tell them why. And I think that really singled me out as a kind of oh Jesus, he's not stepping away from the hard conversations. And I was just really honest with people, and that makes a massive difference when you're honest with people. I think the other thing was that when people got promoted, usually your boss would come and give you the promotion letter and you get your pay rise and all the other stuff that might come with it. I was often seen walking the floor as part of my daily job because that's when you see what's really going on. But I would go down to people's desks and would shake their hand and congratulate them in front of not to make a big thing of it. I'd just say, hey, promotion, really well deserved, congratulations. And you could just see people going, what? Why are you standing? Why are you down here? Why are you not asking me up to your office? And it was like, it's just not how you do it, right? I don't know. I just learned that having that kind of role gives you such an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. And you don't have to do a lot to make that difference. Most of it, you just have to show them they're seen and heard. That's the biggest thing. So yeah, but what did I learn about me? I probably learned that I could deal with a lot more than I thought I could. But again, I think that was probably just because I was thrown in the deep end and I had no choice but to trust the people around me, to manage the people around me, to do a great job for me, as long as I was very clear on what it was I wanted to achieve. Sorry, it's a bit of a long-winded answer.
No, thank you. It was a good answer. Let's move on to your next person, which is Emma. You mentioned her at the beginning.
My wife.
Let's talk about her again. So yeah, what role, other than being your lovely wife, what role did she play in you mentioned that she encouraged you to jack it all in and do something different.
And that's it, right? I mean, that is it. I didn't say it at the time. It was a massive spoiler alert. Yeah, the fourth person is Emma Causa. Professionally, she retains her maiden name or her non-married name. Yeah, I think, and you know, I always get quite emotional when I tell people this story, and I've already kind of told it, so I won't go into too much detail. But I think she just saw in me that I was, because after being that manager, you know, doing that role for 4 years, that's around the time I got divorced, and just after I got divorced, I left. I left Commerzbank. Things started to change at the top in Germany, and it wasn't the company I'd been part of to start with. So it was time to move on. And just around that time, I left and I started doing contract work, interim work. So I did an interim COO role for Lloyds Banking Group. interim program manager role for Royal Bank of Scotland, and an interim operational director for Royal Bank of Scotland again, etc. And I really didn't enjoy those. You know, being an interim, you're not really part of the company. You're not really part of the culture. Nobody really looks to you for it's kind of like running your own business and then going back to work for somebody else again. It's a really hard thing to do. And I am now officially unemployable. So along with Stephen Redgrave, if you ever see me working for somebody else again, shoot me. But
bit harsh.
Yeah, that's exactly what he said. And then he ended up back at Sydney in 2000. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't enjoy the last 4 years of working in the city in those interim roles. It wasn't at the core of me. It was more about earning money and keeping, you know, the wolf from the door than anything. And what was it? 4 years after I was divorced, I met Emma, and we ended up in a relationship together, and we eventually ended up being married. You know, very, very short time later. We are kindred spirits, meant to be together. But she just turned around to me one day, and she could see how desperately unhappy I was. I would probably say I was depressed at that point, because I really wasn't enjoying it. And she said, "Look, you're really not enjoying what you do. You hate it. Why don't I'm doing pretty well," she said. "Why don't I just look after us for a while, and you go start your own thing and see if you can change the world?" And I did. You know, I started off, I trained as a coach. I thought coaching was the route to that. But then when I started selling myself as a coach, having qualified, a lot of people said, "It sounds really fascinating, but I haven't got any time to be coached." And I thought, "Time? How have you not got time to be coached?" And then that, as an objection, really drove me to create a door opener, which is what ended up as Diary Detox. That's where the Diary Detox method came from. Was me showing people they do have time. It's just because they're doing a lot of stuff they just don't need to do. And from there, that went on to becoming not just a door opener. It actually ended up becoming the business in itself. The Diary Detox method, Diary Detox Limited, is that company that owns that IP and created the app. And I wrote the book and delivered workshops and so on and so forth. And what was interesting is that took me down a road of being quite, I don't know, time management focused. And it's not about time management. It was never about time management. It was about leadership. It was about self-leadership, and it was then about leading other people. And that comes when you have the time to lead, when you have time to do those things. None of that would have happened if Emma hadn't given me the opportunity to step out and do my own thing. And there were two options. I'd actually played around with creating a dating app, believe it or not. The dating app was called Whip Woo, because it sounds like, and it was all about, it doesn't matter what it was, but I was kind of toying with both ideas. And I remember Emma, probably about 6 months in, I remember her sitting me down, and this is classic Emma, and she said, "Look, I don't mind you not working. I don't mind you starting your own business. But at the moment, you're mucking around with two different things. I don't care which one you do, just choose one and do that one well." And that was the real kick up the backside I needed, because at that point, I honestly thought she was saying I could do it because she was just trying to give me a way out. And I was kind of also applying for jobs on the side, none of which I got because they could see in me that I didn't want to do it. And so she gave me a kick up the backside and she said, "Look, just choose one." And I knew that the people becoming better leaders, creating a world of better led people, was at my absolute core. And yeah, she's supported me on that journey without question. And there have been moments where it's really tested me. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Absolutely. But
what's been so hard?
It's that kind of classic thing. I mean, I've never seen the film, but I've been made aware of it, called The Field of Dreams. And there's a famous quote in it that says, "If you build it, they will come." I think my approach to starting my business was the Field of Dreams approach, which is if you build it, they will flock to you. Everybody will come to you. Everybody's got a problem with time. Everybody's got a problem with leadership. They'll just come to you. Yeah, it doesn't happen that way.
No.
if somebody, and I've said this a lot recently, if somebody had told me 6.5 years ago, because that's how long I've been doing this now, if somebody had told me 6.5 years ago it was going to be this hard to get to this point, I wonder whether I'd have had the courage to do it. But I'm glad I didn't know, because it was 100% in the core of me. You know, there's not a moment that I don't meet somebody for the first time. They ask me what I do, and I talk about disrupting the existing story of toxic leadership. And when I finish talking, they'll just go, "You love what you do, don't you?" And I'll go, "Yeah, I really do." So it was the right thing to do. But now when most people in the city kind of talk to me about their stressful days, I just kind of go, "You don't know stress." You know, if you don't feel well tomorrow, you stay in bed and somebody will pay you. If I don't feel well tomorrow, nobody pays me. So yeah, it's just been really hard to, especially with so much money spent on leadership development and coaching and time management and all these things. So much money has been spent. It's about 300 billion a year is spent worldwide on those things. And yet there's still the biggest problem businesses have right now is lack of good leadership. And I think everybody's tried most things and it hasn't worked. And so when you have another challenger coming onto the market, albeit a rebellious brand like Time to Lead or like Diary Detox, it's always possible you'll look at it and go, well, if it were that good, then everybody would be doing it. And it's like, but every pioneer was the first in their market at some point. That's just the way it is. So I think it was hard to get the voice out there. It was hard to stand out amongst a crowd of other people, charlatans, I would say. The number of, I mean, crikey. I remember in one of my last interim roles, one of them, I'll say, so therefore you don't know who it is. This organization ran an employee engagement survey, and it said that their people felt 44% well-led. Now, this was a 100,000 person company, right? So feeling 44% well-led is not a good place to be. And so they invested millions of pounds in a leadership development program. It was 3 separate days. There was this big binder. Everybody who managed more than one person mandatorily, if that is the right word, had to go on that course. Everybody. And if you didn't go on it, they would be a tick box. Why haven't you gone on it? Get on that course. Get on that course. 1 year later, having put everybody through that, they re-asked their people, and then they said they felt 34% well-led.
God.
It went down.
Yeah.
And it's because we're doing the wrong things. Mostly we've got the wrong people going into management.
I was just going to say that because before we started recording, we were talking about the right people going into management roles. And, you know, how much of a part do you think that plays in poor management, or the wrong people going into management roles?
Huge. Look, I mean, there's a brilliant advertising campaign at the moment from the Chartered Management Institute, the CMI, which I love. And the biggest thing I'm gutted about is that I didn't think of it. It's a really clever spin on some of the common phrases that are used around poor management. For example, they'll have the word winging it, which is what most accidental managers do. They wing it. And then they've crossed out the WI, put a pink slash, which is one of the big brand colors of the CMI, with the word BR, bringing it on it. And it's obviously trying to suggest that having an association with the CMI is going to change you from an accidental manager into a conscious leader. And indeed, the CMI's, one of their initial strap lines was turning today's accidental managers into tomorrow's conscious leaders.
Nice.
And one of my biggest bugbears with this is that, and the difference between an organization like that, which I have a huge amount of respect for, and my organization, Time to Lead, is I don't want them to become accidental managers in the first place. Yeah, that's my dream, because we shouldn't need to. We shouldn't need to have to go through this place where either you promote the most competent expert in your world, just assuming that they can then manage people, probably with no training. And that's a large part of the CMI's campaign, is saying that 82% of managers get no training whatsoever when they go into management. But the big thing for me is that that suggests that what we should be doing is we should therefore be throwing more training at people. Remember what I said originally, 300 billion a year is spent on management and leadership development every year, and we've still got the problem. So I think it's about time we acknowledge that training is not the only answer. It is part of the answer, but I think there are two other bits that come before that. One is people. We need to start putting the right people in those roles, people who actually want to manage. And secondly, we have to start working on mindset. You could train an expert as much as you like in management theory, management development, but if you put them into a role where A, they don't want to manage, they don't like people, they just want to be left alone, or B, you unknowingly impose targets on them that actually disincentivizes them from managing their people, truly managing them, then it doesn't matter what training you give them, they're still going to fail. And for me, the biggest gap in management development is putting the wrong people on it. And that's why I created Time to Decide. Time to Decide is a day where people who might want to be a manager, who you think might want to be a manager, who probably want to be a manager, but you don't think should be a manager, where you get them to come together with other people like them and explore what becoming a manager will mean. Investing in people, taking on their mistakes as your own mistakes, dealing with their stuff when they're struggling, and they will struggle with stress, with overwhelm, with all these different things, showing them that that is the core of what management is. That isn't the kind of side task, that is the task. Show them that stuff, and at the end of it, ask them, so do you still want to be a manager? And it's amazing how many people say no. Bingo. Don't put those people on a management course because they're not interested in the job. They just want to get paid more money and they want to get a better title. And that's not a good enough incentive to want to become a manager. So yeah, I think it's a fundamental part of creating managers who lead with love.
Well, I'm so interested in what you just said because it really chimes with my views as well. I always talk about knowledge, mindset, and skill/behaviors as being three things that you really need to focus on. And mindset is often missed out. But also knowledge, actually, particularly I do a lot of my work in the diversity and inclusion world. There's an enormous amount of knowledge that's associated with that, that we downplay, I think, just understanding, the complexity of that landscape.
Yeah.
The other thought I had was around, you're a really good example, I think, where you kind of made that leap from, a much lower level to a more senior level. Is the things often that we make us successful at a lower level are not the same things that are going to make us successful at a more senior level. And actually, there's plenty of people in organizations who might not be the most shining stars, and I'm not saying that this was you, but might not be the most shining stars at a lower level, but actually would make really excellent managers.
Yeah.
But they don't get that opportunity because they've not got the skill set that's going to make them as successful lower down.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a fundamental problem, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the only qualification you really need, okay? It's ideal if that you are also knowledgeable about the area in which you're doing this stuff, but it's not necessary, yeah? It's beneficial, it's handy. Like, I was a development manager, so it was handy that I understood the world of development, but I fundamentally don't believe, well, when I certainly went up to that most senior level, none of what I knew about computing, coding, testing, none of that was relevant. I didn't even use any of it. It just wasn't. I think the difference with me is that even though I was lower level, I was a lower level manager. So the very same things that made me a good lower level manager made me a good senior level manager, because it's really no different. It really isn't any different, because, I've been talking to somebody about this very recently. They're talking about a big step up. And I said, but it's no different. Yeah, but it's like hundreds of people. So, yeah, but you're only going to have 5 reporting to you. And down here, how many have you got reporting to you now? 8. So you're going to have less people reporting to you. It's easier. And it's that, we do create those barriers for ourselves that but yeah.
I would say the one big difference I do think there is at a more junior and a more senior level, depending on the role, is that a more enterprise leadership mindset. And again, it comes down to mindset, that kind of, it's not just your area, it's that responsibility and feeling accountability for other parts of the business. I mean, I think that doesn't kick in till much more senior roles, but that for me is where I've seen a big shift for people, and it is a mindset shift more than anything else.
No, and I suppose again that the reason that hasn't come out is because that was kind of intrinsic in me beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
I never saw my job as just running my team.
Mm-hmm.
I saw my job as my team delivering for the other teams around us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in technology, it's crazy the number of times that you will hear IT talk about finance, or IT talk about HR, or HR talk about finance, or whatever. And the way they will talk about each other, it's almost like they are enemies,
mm-hmm.
right? Now, the interesting thing is, for me, it's almost like when you have that situation, and the analogy that I use, it's like watching 5-year-old children play rugby the first time they play rugby. Nobody wants to get hit. So as soon as they get the ball, they go, and they just throw it. Because if I ain't got the ball, I ain't going to get hit. And that, for me, was really, I mean, it happens everywhere, right? But for me, my job was about making it as simple as possible for my people to do theirs. But the question is, what did I see their job as being? Their job was to make it as simple as possible for every other department in the organization to do theirs. So for me, it really was no different, because the enterprise, I was living the enterprise mind at the team level. And again, you're right, it isn't put forward, but that's some of the things that I bring out in something like Time to Manage, which is you've got to stop thinking about this as just your little fiefdom. Yeah. If you don't help if you don't help the hardware guys do their bit, then the thing that your software sits on will fail. And if that fails, we lose customers. Your job's gone. It's in your interest to help them. We're a team. So, yeah, I totally get how it comes across that way, that it's different. In my view, I don't think it should be. I think we should, from the very first moment we become a manager, we should be starting to live that enterprise mindset, that it's about what's around us, not just what's under us, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. Right, let's move on to your next person, your last person, your final person that you're going to talk about. Tell us a bit about her.
Rachel Savage. So it's interesting because, and I'm talking about this at the moment, when I said, I started that business and I really struggled to get that message out, to stand out from the crowd. And Rachel was somebody who I met at a networking event very early in the business. And she reached out for me because you meet a lot of different people at networking events, but they're either going to be a coach or a financial advisor or somebody like that. So they're all the same. And I remember thinking to myself, and I was a coach, right? And it was that one day, and it was at this very meeting where I met her, where I think about 8 people around the table were a coach. But you had a financial coach, you had a life coach, you had a performance coach, you had an executive coach. And I just thought, you know what? I don't like being a coach because you just can't stand out. But I got chatting to her because she called herself a brand storyteller. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And so we just got chatting. And what she showed me was that although I knew what I did, why I did it, who I did it for, and how I did it, I was really bad at telling other people that. And often I was probably telling it them in the wrong order. Yeah, you've seen Simon Sinek start with why TEDx talk. Really popular. A lot of what she does really talks to that, but she doesn't affiliate herself with him in any way, shape, or form. She doesn't need to. because where she comes from is, whenever you look at, like, if you look at, let's say, most advertising campaigns, she looks at organizations as telling a story. And most of the time, the organizations that have their ads, they cast themselves as the hero of the story. Yeah. Look at what we do. We do this to help you do that. We're the best in our industry. Look at how amazing things will be if you come to us. And so they're very much casting themselves as the hero. Whereas Rachel's approach was to start changing things. She said, look, think about any movie that you watch. Yeah. If you look at Harry Potter, for example, is Dumbledore the hero of the story? And it's like, no. She said, no, Harry's the hero of the story, right? Dumbledore is the mentor. Okay. And what she worked with me to understand is that I'm the mentor. I'm not the hero. Yeah. You're the hero. You're the person that's struggling. You're the person that's living underneath the stairs in Dursley. And the funny thing is that she lives in Dursley.
Hopefully not under the stairs.
No, not indeed. It was the Dursleys, and actually the Dursleys were named after that place, Dursley. And she said, this isn't about you. It's about them. It's about their struggle. So what she helped me to do, and it was really interesting because I'd worked with marketing people in the past to try and create the customer value proposition and try and create this hook. And it never worked. I kept going back to what I do and how I do it. And Rachel had some really simple, and again, that's one of my values, simplicity, really simple and really clever ways of getting me to talk in a way that, it was mainly through writing. Actually, one of the first things she gets you to do after doing some initial stuff is write a letter. And it was really fascinating that by writing that letter to the person I was writing it to in the way that I did, brought out the core of what I was about, the core of my story, and what the struggles were that we're going through. And what that allowed her to do is that allowed her to pick out certain parts of that letter. And then she would basically pick them out and summarize them into a story document. And what was really fascinating is that when I looked at what was there, I went, wow, that's a really great question. Where did that come from? She said, you wrote that. I went, no, I didn't. She said, you did. And she showed me the highlighted bit where I'd written that. And I went, I didn't realize I was writing that. She went, exactly. And so she was really clever at bringing out the core of my story about why I was doing this, who I was doing it for, and more importantly, what were they going through? What were the pains that were in their world right now? How did it make them feel? Why did they think it was happening? What had they tried to do? All these different things. And what was really fascinating is that for the first moment, I actually started talking from my potential client's point of view rather than from my point of view. And just as a simple example, I'd done a post a couple of days before I got the story document from her. And this post had said something like, wouldn't it be great if you had more time to do this, or if you had more time to focus on your people instead of doing this, etc., etc. Didn't really get much uptake. And then one of the messages that came out, and I posted it the day after I got it, and it got more engagement than I'd ever had. And it simply started off by saying, did you have trouble sleeping last night? Were you worried about what you didn't get done today and what you probably won't get done tomorrow? It was as simple as that. And it had more engagement than I'd ever had. And it was because anybody looking at that, anybody that looked at my original post would probably have gone, well, yeah, it would be great if I could do that, but that's not possible. Okay, the deniers, the objection straight away. Whereas the second post, they looked at it and go, yeah, that's me. Click. And it was as simple as that. And so Rachel helped me verbalize my story from the hero's point of view. And in my current guise, the hero is called Cassie. Cassie is either a HR director, a head of operations, somebody who is really struggling, having spent thousands and thousands on leadership development, is still not seeing the leaders and managers that she wants to see. That's who she is. And so the story now basically talks from her point of view. So when those posts come out, it's going to be talking to her. Are you fed up with the thousands you've spent on leadership development and are still struggling to get the leaders you paid for? that kind of thing. And so that's kind of why Rachel. But what's interesting, and of course, you were talking about being an author when we first spoke ages ago.
Yeah.
And this is why Rachel's also really important to this, which is because at the end of our first session talking, Rachel turned around to me and she said, "You know, there's a book in this, don't you?" And I loved the idea of writing a book, but I got a D at English language the first time I took it. I wasn't good with words. I'm actually pretty okay with words now, but I wasn't good with words. And I'd have loved to have written a book, but I had no idea what a book would be, what it would talk about, etc. And it was her saying that and her helping me draw out that story that actually led to me eventually, when I realized that my calling was to go back into big businesses and help them disrupt the existing story of toxic management. And I didn't want to leave them behind. It's basically those words that got me to write my book, What Are You Doing? The Uncomfortable Truth About How You Waste Time at Work. So yeah, she helped me find my voice, and I probably wouldn't have written a book if it hadn't been for her saying that. And I still work with her to this very day. She is my work wife. She reminds me of my sister quite a lot, interestingly. But we're very close. We probably talk, if not every day, every other day, I would say. And yeah, she's really helped me, and her ability to generate ideas around that story as well. Once you've got it, have you thought about doing this? Wow, what a great idea. Can I tell you about one of the ideas? It's another book.
Yes, please do.
So we were talking about, one of the things Rachel talks about is a brand gift. And it's something that you can give away to clients. And it doesn't have to be a physical gift. It could be a webinar that you do for free that helps them understand a challenge they're having or whatever. And we were talking about a gift for Cassie. And I'd had this idea of creating a Rubik's Cube that had the different colors of the Diary Detox method on it around leading, managing, doing, floating, and living. And she kind of went, yeah, plastics. I don't know. I don't really like the idea of that. And we were just kicking ideas around. And then she just turned around and she went, hang on a minute. And it's only because she knows my story that she had this idea. She went, hang on a minute. She ran off and she came back and she brought me this book. And it was one of those spoof Ladybird books.
Yes.
You know, where it's the Ladybird book to driving a car or blah, whatever it is. And it was called the Ladybird book to meetings. And as you went through, there were 52 pages of the Peter and Jane type, or Janet and John, depending on how old you are, the Peter and Jane storytelling. And it was spoofing the world of business and how meetings are so misused and how crazy it is. And she turned around and she said, why don't we write one of these ladybird birds, the Ladybird Book of Management? And what it would do, and what's interesting is all of the pages, all of the themes for each of the pages are in my story. They're called the Ordinary World Messages. She said we could do one page for each of those things about how crazy it is that managers will spend all their time, you know, managers are the most important people in a company. They must be, they get paid the most and they have the coolest titles. And it was like, it's ridiculous, right? But it's true. That's how people think about it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a Ladybird Book of Management that we can give to Cassie so that Cassie will look at that and go, oh my God, that's us. That is so us, right? And who knows where that will go. Hopefully that will take Cassie on a journey in a fairly gentle way, because you don't want Cassie to feel uncomfortable or ridiculed. Just wanted to look at it and go, the first step in fixing a problem is admitting you have one. And this tells you probably have one. So her idea is generation, and it's just because she knows the story that helps her to do that stuff. So yeah, she's been she is the final person, and the story is to be continued.
I now have an image of Cassie in my mind.
What does she look like?
She looks like all the HR people I've ever known merged into one.
Yeah, I mean, she's a HR person. She could be an L&D person, but she could be. She's likely to also potentially be a chief operating officer or a CEO, someone who's just fed up of not getting what they need to get. So yeah.
Brilliant, love that. Right, Paul, I'm going to ask you a couple of my typical questions that I ask all of my guests. The first one is advice to your younger self.
Ooh, this is a hard one. right? Because I don't believe in regrets. And the reason I don't is because if I was going to change anything, it would suggest that I'm not happy with where I am now, because I do believe in causality. Yeah, what you do then affects what you do now. And I'm really happy where I am. And I wouldn't forego any of the experiences I've been through, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. So I don't think I'd change anything. But if I was going to give myself, if I have given my son this advice, it's that you never get anything done without people. So care about people, and everything else will take care of itself.
Lovely. I think that's beautiful. What about your strapline, your title for your story?
Yeah, for me, it was "There is no right way. I did it my way." and it was such a, I mean, there's that book, Squiggly Careers. I've had the squiggliest of careers. But again, I wouldn't change any of it. I mean, crikey, it does scare me sometimes that when you talk about all the things that have happened, Anne Cohen saying what she said and all that stuff, one person not saying one of those things,
yeah,
and it wouldn't have happened, or I don't think it would have happened. So yeah, I just go with it.
Yeah, it's that sliding doors thing, isn't it? It's fascinating.
It is, absolutely.
What about a book that you would recommend?
So for me, there's a book I read. I can't remember when it was. I read it probably about 4 years ago, and I liked it because of its commentary on management, and also because of its simplicity. I really loved it, and it was a book called Good to Great by a guy called Jim Collins. And yeah, it was just simple, really, really simple. The way it got me to really think about, when I was in the early stages of Diary Detox, got me to think about some of the things that I was doing, which was effectively drawing people away from what I was doing. I was pushing them away rather than drawing them in. It was really fascinating. And it was this, we called it a flywheel concept. So look out for that. But one of the other things that, well, very, very early on, it was talking about getting the right people on the bus. And talking about that is it, right? It's people. Get the right people on the bus. When I got that big jump up to 350 people, and I had those 5 people, I put 5 completely different people in each of those roles. I had one guy that was the kind of the really ambitious type. I had the one that was what you call the union rep. He was like really caring about people, wanted the best for people. Somebody else who was a really high achiever. And all these people were there for a different reason. I remember one of my peers saying to me, "Why on earth have you put those people there?" And I said, "Because they're going to all give me a different perspective on what's going on. I'm going to get the range of ideas, and we'll just have to agree one to go with." That for me was my example of getting the right people on the bus. So it really resonated with me. And I saw that. I thought, because I did that, I got the right people on the bus. And it wasn't always easy, but it was really, really simple. That's what you do. Put the right people on the bus and everything else will work out.
Thank you. I love that book too. Yeah, I think it's, I even just like the title. I find it really useful as a phrase when I'm talking to people. Final thing is, you've talked a bit about your Ladybird book that's coming. What's next for you? Where are you going?
Well, this is kind of the inflection point, I think, for me. So Diary Detox is now done, as in my involvement in it is kind of done. It's now an app. Anybody can now learn the 10 habits. They can subscribe to the app. It's automated. They can go do it. And I have very minimal involvement in that. But it is a foundational part to my leadership model, which is around the colors and so on. And so it's now moving into the time to lead world. So we've now got time to decide, time to manage, and time to lead. So any organization that wants to create an aspiring managers program, they can do that just simply by either plugging and playing or taking the whole lot of that journey. So that's ongoing at the moment, and that's working out really well. But there's something else that's part of time to lead, which is just, well, I wouldn't say just reared its head. It's been rearing its head for a while, but I'm really excited about it. And it's about that conversation we were having around everybody investing in skills and nobody really investing in mindset and people.
Mm.
And the key for me is that I think we now need to start opening eyes of Cassie. Yeah, Cassie's there. She spent a lot of money doing all this stuff and it hasn't worked. And the instinct is, let's just buy some more courses. And that probably won't work either, because it hasn't worked before. 300 billion a year. I will say that again. So for me, whilst you've got it's time to decide and it's time to manage and it's time to lead, that's the ideal place where you want organizations to go. But they're not going to go there unless they take time to understand why what they have done to now hasn't given them the results they want. So we've basically created time to understand, and it's more of a consulting engagement. Okay, so what this is an organization spent a lot of money doing this stuff and it hasn't worked. And we want to know why it hasn't worked and what we can do to fix it. So basically, time to understand is about going into an organization, understanding what the indicators are right now. What is it that they're seeing, hearing, feeling, and saying that tells them that leadership isn't working? And that could be external indicators like Glassdoor. It could be internal indicators like engagement surveys and so on. It's then about taking that knowledge and then running some diagnostics with their management community to fill in some of the gaps so that we can paint the full picture, because this isn't just about skills. It's about tone from the top. It's about people. And it's also about mindset. And when you run some of the diagnostics we run, people's mindset comes to the fore really quickly, and it's really quite compelling. And so the idea is you take those indicators, you run some other diagnostics, you then paint the full picture, which will explain why that investment hasn't already worked. And then you work with them to co-create a plan that will either bring in new things or reuse most of the stuff they already have, just with some tweaks. So for example, if you want managers, I'll give you a quick example. If you want managers to exclude themselves from management, to normalize the idea that people say, no, I don't want to be a manager, you've got to give them another route. And most organizations haven't got another route. So part of time to understand might show them that the only thing you're missing is giving them another route. So give them another route, and then you're going to give people the confidence that if they don't want to go into management, they can go into something else and not have to worry about losing their job or it being the end of their career. So time to understand is about understanding what you're doing right now, why it hasn't worked, and what you need to do to make it work and get back that return on investment in millions of pounds that you've invested in leadership development.
It's a much more systemic way of approaching leadership and leadership development.
Absolutely. And I don't think, and I think it is truly a consulting engagement, right? Because you shouldn't have to do that continually. You should have to do that once. You should just look at your existing landscape and go, oh, wow, we didn't realize that was happening. Well, okay, what can we do about that? Come up with a plan. They either go and implement that or they have me help them do that. But once that's been done, you step away, and you shouldn't have to then revisit that, as long as you stay within the pattern and just go and operationalize. Sometimes I think we get a little bit caught up, L&D and HR sometimes get a little bit caught up thinking, well, we should do that. It's like, no, there's a different, your job is to operationalize that, not to actually figure out why it's gone wrong in the first. It's great if you can, but not always great if you can't. So yeah, that's the next thing. Time to understand is the next kind of key chapter in Time to Lead's journey.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've loved hearing your story and all the different people that have influenced you along the way, as you say. Just sometimes it's a question or an action that they've done that sent you on a particular trajectory. So really fascinated to hear that. So thank you very much.
No, thank you for letting me tell the story. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. This podcast is brought to you by Liberare Consulting, with editing provided by Hawkins Social. If you enjoyed today's episode, why not click on the subscribe button so you are the first to hear about new episodes. We look forward to welcoming you back soon.